In 1870, a Texas trail cook fed 20 exhausted men from a single wooden box. No modern kitchen, no refrigeration, just fire and iron. We threw that knowledge away. When convenience took over, we forgot the men who built the American West were not just surviving, they were eating genius. Number 24 was known as overland trout. Number 10 was invented for alkali dust. Number 1 is a stew modern chefs would charge a fortune for. These 30 meals kept America standing. Hit subscribe. It is time to remember. Number 30, cowboy coffee. You did not wake up slowly on a cattle drive. You woke up in the cold, dark dirt, and you walked toward the fire. The trail cook was already there, boiling water in a heavy black pot. Before 1865, trail coffee was a gamble of green beans you had to roast in a skillet yourself. Then, Arbuckle started packaging pre-roasted coffee. It changed the American West. The cook threw whole handfuls of grounds directly into the boiling water. No filters. No delicate pouring. They boiled it until it was thick enough to float a horseshoe in. You poured it into a tin cup, blew the ash off the top, and let the caffeine hit your blood. It was fuel for a 14-hour workday in the saddle. Modern coffee shops charge $6 for a pour-over. Your trail boss called it morning. Number 29, dried fruit. When you ride a horse across endless stretches of nothing but grass and dust, you cannot pack fresh apples. They rot. You cannot pack heavy jars of preserves. They break. The men who moved millions of cattle across the country needed food that was trail stable. They packed dried fruit into the saddlebags and the wooden drawers of the Chuckwagon. Apples, peaches, and apricots left out in the sun until all the water was gone, and nothing but concentrated sugar and fiber remained. It was incredibly portable. When the men rode away from the main camp for days at a time, they kept a handful of this in their pockets. You chewed it slow to make it last. It kept you alive when the wagon was miles away. Today, companies put it in shiny foil pouches and market it as premium hiking fuel. Number 28, stewed prunes. The open range was an unforgiving place. There were no bakeries, no corner stores, and no fresh sweets. But men doing backbreaking physical labor still craved something to look forward to at night. The cook knew this. He took dried, wrinkled prunes from the chuck box and threw them into an iron pot over the campfire coals. He added water and let them simmer in the dark. Slowly, the heat brought them back to life. They swelled up, releasing dark syrup. This was specifically named as a common dessert side on the trail. You scooped it into your tin plate next to the beef grease. It was dark, mushy, and cheap. Today, people mock prunes as a joke for the elderly. But out on the lonely grass sea of the American West, your great-grandfather simply called it a well-earned trail dessert. Number 27, rice. You do not think of rice when you picture the American cowboy. You think of meat. But meat spoiled if it was not preserved, and an entire crew of exhausted men could not survive on beef alone. The cook needed bulk. He needed calories that would not rot in the back of a wooden wagon under a blazing summer sun. Rice kept perfectly well for months and cooked easily over an unpredictable fire. You just needed water and heat. In 1870, rice cost exactly 5 cents a pound. You threw it into a cast iron pot and let it swell until thick and heavy. It filled empty stomachs when the cattle drive dragged on. Today, restaurant prices are rising faster than grocery prices. That cheap pound of rice still does the exact same silent, heavy work it always did for working-class families today. Number 26, dried meat. Before the guns fired and the fresh game was skinned, there were long stretches of the trail where a cowboy had nothing fresh to eat. The Chuckwagon could not carry an icebox. The cook had to pack trail-stable protein before they ever left the ranch. You took thin strips of muscle, salted them heavily, and hung them in the dry wind until they turned into dark, stiff ribbons of leather. It was tough. You had to gnaw on it for 20 minutes just to get it soft enough to swallow. But it did not rot. It rode in the saddlebags for weeks, waiting for the day when the herd was moving too fast to stop for a proper meal. Today, gas stations sell jerky in plastic wrappers for $10 a bag. Back then, it was just pure, hard, unforgiving American survival. Number 20. Beans. A cowboy on the dusty open range worked brutal, dangerous hours for just $25 to $40 a month. When the sun finally dropped, there was no grand feast waiting for him. There was only a heavy black pot, sitting directly in the white-hot coals. Inside that pot were the cheapest staples of the American West. They called them whistleberries. Sometimes, trying to make them sound like a luxury, they called them Pecos strawberries. The cook boiled them low and slow until the tough skins split and the broth turned thick with salt pork fat. You held out your tin plate, and he ladled a heavy, steaming pile right in the center. It was a daily ritual. Today, chain restaurants sell them as an overpriced cowboy-themed side dish. Your great-grandfather just called them survival beans. Number 19. Beans and biscuits. You did not eat courses on the cattle trail. You ate a paired meal pattern that became the rhythm of your life. The men grabbed their tin plates and walked to the fold-down workbench of the Chuckwagon. The cook handed them two things: a ladle of heavy, dark beans and a hard sourdough bullet. That was the entire plate. You took the biscuit and you broke it in half. You used the rough crumb to scrape the bottom of the tin plate, soaking up every single drop of salty bean cooking water. It was not a side dish. It was a mechanism for delivering cheap calories into exhausted muscles. When you only make $1 a day for risking your neck in a stampede, you do not leave a single drop of fat behind. This was arithmetic. Number 18. Beans, beef, and taters. This was not a delicate recipe passed down through culinary schools. It was an ironclad formula remembered by puny Martin, a cowboy who knew exactly what kept a man standing. His remembered rule was simple: beef, beans, taters. That is what you had to have. The cook threw everything into the same heavy iron vessels. The beef provided the raw muscle recovery. The beans brought the cheap, heavy bulk. The potatoes gave the quick energy needed to wake up the next morning and do it all over again. You did not ask for variety. You asked for volume. You sat on the freezing ground, balancing the plate on your knees, and shoveled it in before the cold dust could settle on the meat. It was the blunt, unglamorous fuel of the American frontier. Number 17. Potatoes fixed some way. When you look at old ranch memories, potatoes show up over and over again. Pauline Barham cooked for ranch hands, and her recollection makes it absolutely clear that potatoes were a recurring cowboy standby. They were not glamorous. They were dragged out of a dark sack in the back of the wagon. The cook did not peel them carefully. He washed off the prairie dirt, chopped them roughly with a heavy knife, and threw them straight into the boiling grease. Sometimes they were mashed. Sometimes they were fried crisp and dark against the cast iron. It did not matter. They were the silent, starchy anchor that kept working men from collapsing. Modern diets tell you to avoid the starch. The men who built this country knew that starch was the only thing keeping them alive. Number 16. Fresh beef steaks. You might think cattle drivers ate steak every single night, but that was only true if the trail boss allowed it. When cattle were available for slaughter, fresh beef was never in short supply. The cook would bring down a steer right there on the grass. Nothing was aged in a cooler. The meat was butchered hot and thrown immediately over an open, roaring fire. Blood hissed against the white coals. Smoke filled the camp. They did not use delicate marinades or expensive rubs. They used salt, heat, and iron. The steaks were cut thick, seared hard on the outside, and handed to men who had not tasted fresh meat in weeks. You cut it with the same knife you used to work the horses. It was not a luxury dinner. It was a visceral, bloody reward for pure survival. Number 15. Beef roast. The men were always hungry. Pauline Barham cooked for the ranch hands, and she remembered exactly what it took to fill them. They would eat everything, and they enjoyed it. You took a massive cut of beef and buried it in a heavy iron pot covered with white ash. The smell of scorched beef grease and wood smoke hung heavy in the freezing air. It cooked slow all afternoon while the men drove cattle through the dust. When they finally rode into camp, the meat was falling apart. It was a massive, hot, undeniable comfort. This was not a delicate pot roast cooked in a modern suburban oven. It was heavy, dark muscle meant to rebuild the bodies of exhausted hired hands. They were not cooking poor. They were cooking smart. Number 14. roast beef with beans and potatoes. When the Chuckwagon had all its supplies intact, the cook built the ultimate working man's plate. This was a fuller camp plate documented straight out of ranch memory testimony. You did not serve things in separate courses. You took the heavy tin plate and piled it high. A thick slab of the dark beef roast went down first. Next to it, a heavy spoonful of soft, salty beans. Then, rough chunks of potatoes dragged through the hot grease. The flavors bled into each other. The beef juice soaked into the starchy potatoes. The bean broth mingled with the burnt fat. You ate it fast, in silence, huddled near the fire. Today, people pay $40 for a steakhouse platter. The trail cook built it for pennies just to keep men alive. Number 13. Wild game suppers. The wagon box only held what the horses could pull. When the preserved rations ran dangerously low and they could not butcher a steer, the men looked to the horizon. Fresh beef was systematically supplemented by wild game. A cowboy would drop a deer, an antelope, or even wild turkey, and tie it to the saddle. The cook skinned it right there in the dirt. He hacked it into rough chunks and dropped it into the smoking iron skillet. You ate whatever the American wilderness handed you that day. There were no neatly packaged cuts. There was only blood, bone, and iron. Modern hunters spend thousands of dollars on gear to do this on weekends. In the 1870s, you did it because the wagon was empty and you were starving. Number 12. Fish on the trail. You rode through endless seas of dry, choking dust for weeks. But sometimes, the trail boss drove the herd across a running river. When the water was high and cold, the men did not just drink. They fished. Fish was not constant, but it was specifically noted as a vital trail supplement when available. The cook took whatever they pulled from the water, gutted it with a hunting knife, and threw it straight into the black skillet with a scoop of hot salt pork fat. The delicate meat fried hard against the iron, crisping up fast. It was a shocking, sudden break from the endless monotony of heavy beef and beans. It was a brief, desperate luxury. The wilderness owed them nothing, but that night, it let them eat well. Number 11. Texas butter. Lard cost exactly 6 cents a pound in 1870. The cook could not afford to waste a single drop of fat left in the skillet after searing the meat, so he invented a miracle. He took the leftover beef grease, sprinkled in a handful of cheap flour, and browned it over the coals. He added water and stirred it slow until it thickened. They called it Texas butter, or simply sop. You poured it thick and heavy right over your sourdough biscuits. It made a hard, dry biscuit meal feel suddenly rich and warm. Today, modern restaurants in America call this gravy, and they build an entire expensive weekend brunch plate around it. Your trail cook just called it sop, and it cost absolutely nothing. Number 10. Pooch. You rode for 14 hours through the choking white alkali dust of the American West. Your throat felt like cracked leather. The cook needed to fix morale fast, and this dish was easy enough for even a green cook to pull off. He reached for a heavy tin of canned tomatoes, threw it into an iron pot, and ripped up whatever stale bread was left in the box. He dumped in cheap sugar and stewed it all together. They called it pooch. The acid and the sugar provided cheap comfort and thirst relief in the brutal alkali country. Today, modern food writers take tomatoes and bread, call it a rustic tomato panade, and charge you for culinary creativity. Your trail cook just called it pooch. Number 9. Canned tomatoes on the trail. Sometimes the dust on the open range was so thick you could not see the horns of the steer walking 10 feet in front of you. That dust coated the lungs and cracked the lips of every hired hand. Warm water in a wooden barrel was not enough to wash it down. The cook kept heavy tins of canned tomatoes in the wagon strictly for this reason. They were not always served as a standalone meal. They featured significantly on the trail because of their specific medicinal and refreshing role against the alkali dust. A cowboy would puncture the tin with his knife and drink the acidic red juice straight from the jagged metal. It cut the dust. It kept men breathing. Number 8. Fruit pie. The men who drove cattle did not expect luxury. They expected beans, salt, pork, and a hard patch of dirt to sleep on. But a good trail cook held operational authority far beyond just cooking. He controlled the pulse of the entire camp. If the weather was clear and the cook actually had the time and ingredients, He rolled out dough right on the fold-down door of the chuck box. He baked a full fruit pie in the iron coals. When the exhausted men smelled baking fruit instead of burning beef fat, the tension in the camp vanished. It was not just dessert. It was a massive, labor-intensive gift that proved somebody cared if they survived another week. Number 7. Boggy top pie. Sometimes the cook did not have enough flour to weave a perfect top crust, or he just did not have the daylight left to try. He took the stewed fruit, poured it into the heavy bottom crust, and left the top wide open to the dark prairie sky. This open-faced fruit pie was a real, documented dish out on the trail. The Cowboys gave it a name directly tied to the rough landscape they were trying to survive. They called it boggy top pie. It bubbled and boiled in the Dutch oven, looking exactly like a treacherous mud bog out on the trail. You ate it with a tin spoon, scraping the burnt fruit sugars off the black iron. It was strange, messy, and perfect. Number 6. Peach cobbler. You knew the trail boss was happy with the herd when you smelled this cooking. The cook took canned peaches, heavy syrup, and a thick layer of sweetened dough. He buried the heavy Dutch oven deep in the white-hot ash and let the magic happen. The dough soaked up the syrup and baked into a dense crust. This was pure morale food. A good cook baked it for the crew because dessert meant he cared, or it meant the drive had a highly successful day. It was scooped out, steaming hot into battered tin plates. Today, cobbler comes back as a branded, shrink-wrapped dessert item at fast food chains. Your trail boss just knew a hot peach cobbler kept 20 men from quitting the drive. Number 5. Spotted pup. When you live out on the open plains for months, you do not write down recipes on elegant cards. You pass them down entirely through word of mouth. The trail cook threw together this rough pudding over the coals, using whatever scraps he had left in the heavy wooden wagon. Because exact recipe variants differ, this dessert survives mostly through oral tradition and regional variation. But the men did not care about culinary consistency. They cared that it was sweet and hot. You sat in the freezing dirt, eating it out of a battered tin bowl, finding whatever comfort you could in the dark. It was named specifically as a trail dessert. It was not fancy. It was just a way to make exhausted men smile when they were 1,000 miles from a real bed. Number 4. Calf slobbers. The isolation of the American West bred a very specific kind of rough, dark humor. If the cook miraculously had eggs and sugar, and the mood struck him, he would whip up a white foam to dress up a pie. But a tired cowboy covered in dust would never call it a delicate French pastry. They looked at the white, frothy meringue topping sitting on the dessert and gave it a cowboy slang name that matched the raw cattle world surrounding them. They called it calf slobbers. It was strange, memorable, and highly shareable. You ate the sweet foam while laughing with men you trusted with your life. They took something elegant and dragged it straight down into the dirt where they lived. Number 3. Son of a bitch in a sack. When you have no modern kitchen equipment, your cooking methods become desperate and absolutely brilliant. The cook took dried fruit and rough dough, but he did not have a proper baking tin to shape it. So he physically sewed the ingredients right into a cloth sack and dropped the whole heavy bundle into a boiling pot of water to steam. It expanded and cooked into a dense, solid mass. The men dragged it out of the boiling water, sliced open the steaming wet cloth, and ate the heavy pudding right by the fire. It remains one of the oddest documented Chuckwagon foods in history. They called it son of a bitch in a sack, or son of a gun in a sack. They did not need expensive bakeware. They just needed the calories. This was pure, unpolished American ingenuity. Number 2, the whole plate. Before we get to the strangest stew on the trail, you have to understand the daily reality of the hired hand. After 14 hours in the saddle, he did not walk into a warm house. He walked up to the fold-down wooden surface of the chuck box. Waiting for him was the real center of cowboy life. A heavy tin plate piled high with hot biscuits, beans, beef, potatoes, and black coffee. The wagon became the one familiar home in the vast open range, a place to socialize, receive care, eat, and rest after a brutal day. You stood by the wheels, chewing tough meat and swallowing scalding coffee. It was not flashy. It was the single most human climax of the entire day. Number 1, son of a bitch stew. Out on the trail, when an unweaned calf was butchered, Absolutely nothing was thrown away. The cook took the marrow gut, the sweetbreads, the kidneys, the heart, the liver, the tongue, and sometimes even the brains. He chopped it all up, dusted it with flour, and threw it into a single iron pot over the campfire with onions and chiles. As Ramon F. Adams famously recorded, the rule of the Chuckwagon was simple. You throw everything in the pot but the hair, horns, and holler. This was not a novelty. It was total frontier ingenuity, the pure arithmetic of anti-waste survival. Today, high-end American chefs call this nose-to-tail cooking and charge modern diners a fortune for their culinary bravery. Your trail cook just called it supper.